The evening sky sagged low over the prairie, painted in bruised purples and rust-yellow streaks as if the day itself had been battered. Wind dragged across the open land in long, restless breaths, slipping through dry grass and rattling the loose boards of the old fence where Edna Rose stood alone. Her fingers, stiff with age and cold, pressed a bent nail against wood that had already splintered beyond cooperation. She tried again, lifting the hammer, but her arm trembled from the simple weight. The nail slipped, clattered to the dirt, and she muttered a tired curse under her breath. Edna crouched to retrieve it, but a sharp pull in her lower back forced her upright too fast. For a moment the world blurred. She steadied herself on the broken post, jaw tight, refusing to accept the weakness creeping into her bones. She wasn't ready to surrender pieces of her life, this land, this fence, this silence that had been both her torment and her companion since her husband died. The sky growled with thunder, and she exhaled in frustration, knowing the storm would finish the fence before she ever fixed it. Then the ground began to tremble beneath her boots. Hoofbeats. Heavy, urgent, cutting straight through the wind. She turned sharply, one hand rising in instinctive fear though she had nothing to defend herself with. A lone rider burst over the ridge, a dark figure against the fading light, hoarse breathing clouds into the cold air. He moved like a man who'd been riding hard for hours, maybe days, and wasn't stopping unless forced. His coat was dusted in travel grime, his hat brim pulled low, his silhouette sharp and severe. Edna took a half step back, but her boot struck a loose board. She slipped, arms flailing for balance. Before she hit the ground, a strong hand closed around her arm, steadying her with surprising gentleness. She looked up into a pair of tired, clear eyes, eyes that carried the weight of too much road behind them. "You all right?" he asked, voice low and roughened by dust and distance. "I would be if this cursed fence didn't have a personal grudge against me," she snapped, more embarrassed than hurt. He didn't smile, but something softened in his expression. He released her slowly as if making sure she truly had her footing. For a moment neither spoke. The wind hissed around them, lifting loose strands of her graying hair and tugging at the hem of his coat. "You fixing it alone?" he asked. "No one else left to do it," she replied. She forced her aching back straight and reached for the hammer again, though she knew she wouldn't manage much before the storm broke open. The man dismounted without ceremony. He walked to the fallen board, lifted it with ease and examined the break. His movements were deliberate, efficient. This wasn't a man who wasted effort. She watched him slot the wood against the post, holding it steady with one gloved hand. "Where's the nail?" She hesitated, then handed it to him. His fingers brushed hers, calloused, scarred, warm despite the cold. He aligned the nail and drove it in cleanly with 2 precise strikes. "You don't have to help," she said. "If I ride on," he answered, "I'll think about this fence falling apart all night." It was such a strange, flat explanation that she let out a short, breathy laugh. He continued working without waiting for thanks. Together they repaired the section quickly, though he clearly did the heavier lifting. The sky darkened, the smell of rain thickening in the air. By the time the last board was secured, the first cold drops spotted the dirt. "You should get indoors," he said. "So should you." She hesitated. "There's shelter in the barn. Dry hay. Better than the open road." He studied her, the kind of look a man uses to measure someone's intentions without offending. She didn't flinch from it. Finally, he nodded once and tied his horse to the post. They walked toward the small house, boots sinking into softening ground as rain began falling in earnest. At the porch, she stopped him with a small, uncertain gesture. "Wait." She reached into her apron pocket, fingers trembling for reasons she didn't want to name, and pulled out a folded letter. She pressed it against his chest and he instinctively caught it before it fell. "What's this for?" he asked. Her throat tightened. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. A drifter. A loner. A man carrying quiet storms inside him. A man who might understand danger when he saw it. A man who might believe her when others wouldn't. "It's something I couldn't say out loud," she whispered. "Not yet." The rain came harder, drumming on the porch roof. He weighed the letter in his palm, eyes narrowing slightly at its unexpected heaviness. Thunder rolled across the hills, echoing like distant gunfire. "All right," he said finally. "I'll read it." She opened the door for him but didn't step inside yet. He paused as though considering something else to say, but instead he walked toward the barn. She watched his silhouette blur in the rain until the shadows swallowed him. Standing alone on the porch, the weight she'd carried for months shifted, not lifted but no longer hers alone. And that knowledge, fragile as the storm's first strike, was enough to keep her rooted there a moment longer, staring into the dark where the stranger had vanished, wondering if she had just saved herself, or doomed him. Jonas Vale woke before the sun, stirred not by the softness of hay beneath him but by the uneasy memory of the folded letter resting in his coat. The barn was dim, shafts of early light slipping through cracks in the boards, catching dust in their pale beams. His horse nickered quietly as if sensing his tension. Jonas sat up, reached into his coat, and unfolded the paper with the solemnity of a man expecting trouble he'd tried to outrun. The handwriting was tight and unsteady, each line forced onto the page with a mixture of desperation and restraint. As he read, the quiet of the barn thickened until even the morning wind seemed to hold its breath. Edna wrote of threats she'd endured alone for months, men on horseback circling her land, voices mocking her in the night, crude symbols carved into her gate. She admitted she had lied when she said she lived in peace. Her husband's death, once believed an accident by most townsfolk, she described here as a deliberate killing. She'd witnessed it. Men had taken him, demanded he sign away their land, and when he refused, they dragged him behind the barn and made sure she heard every last moment. Worse still, the letter ended with 2 short lines. They said they'd return. And now they know your face. Jonas lowered the paper slowly as though it might bite him. He stared into the dim, thinking about the red satisfaction in dangerous men who preyed on isolated souls like her. He didn't know her well, but the fear in her words was unmistakable and honest. He folded the letter again, placed it inside his coat, and rose. His body reminded him of miles ridden, nights slept in ditches, and fights that had left scars too old to sting. He stepped outside into the crisp morning, the sky clearing after last night's storm. The ground was damp, the air sharp with the smell of wet soil and pine. Edna stood on her porch, arms folded tightly around herself, watching him with a mixture of dread and hope that made her look years younger and older at the same time. Jonas approached slowly, boots squelching in the softened earth. She didn't ask if he'd read it. She could see the truth in his eyes. "I didn't want to drag you into this," she said, her voice thin but steady. I didn't know what else to do." "Why didn't you tell me last night?" Jonas asked. She shook her head. "You'd have ridden on." "Maybe," he admitted. She looked at him sharply, surprised by the honesty. Jonas wasn't a man who passed through places just to solve someone else's problems. The world had taught him that stepping into a fight meant inheriting grudges. But he also wasn't someone who let a widow stand alone against men who used fear as a weapon. "They'll come back," Jonas said. "And soon." Edna exhaled shakily. "I know." She motioned toward the table inside and offered him a cup of coffee. It was thin, barely more than tinted water, but Jonas took it without complaint. The house smelled faintly of smoke and lavender soap. A quilt lay draped over the back of the closest chair, frayed at the edges yet neatly folded. Everything in the place carried a quiet dignity, the kind of care only someone fighting to hold on to their life would maintain. Edna sat across from him, hands curled around her own cup for warmth. "I didn't lie in that letter," she said. "But I didn't write everything either." "Then say it now." She hesitated, studying him as if measuring what he could bear. "After they killed my husband, they warned me that speaking out would be the end of me. No one believed me when I tried to hint at what happened. They dismissed me. Said grief was twisting my mind." Her eyes darkened. "But they weren't done. They wanted my land too. Water runs beneath it. Shallow but clean. They think it's worth killing for." Jonas listened without interrupting, absorbing each detail. She continued, "I heard them last week. Out by the tree line. Laughing. Calling my name like it was some kind of game." Her voice trembled for only a second before she straightened her spine. "I'm tired of being afraid." Jonas regarded her carefully. She wasn't a fragile woman. She was someone who'd bent under too much weight but refused to break. That resilience tugged at something in him he tried to bury long ago. "You said they know my face," he said. "You recognize any of them?" "Only by their voices," she replied. "And the small red mark they paint on their saddlebags. A crest of some sort." Jonas' jaw tightened at the description. Not recognition, just an understanding that marks like that usually belonged to groups who preferred lawless power. "How many?" he asked. "For last time," she whispered. "But they never move alone." Jonas set his cup down and glanced toward the window. The land beyond the yard stretched open and vulnerable, no cover if someone approached with bad intentions. "You'll need to stay close to the house," he said. "Keep your doors locked. No wandering outside alone. And you?" "I'll be around." She didn't ask what that meant. She didn't need to. Silence settled between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Jonas rose, adjusting the coat over his shoulders. Edna watched him with a question lodged behind her lips, but he didn't wait for her to speak. Instead, he stepped outside again, scanning the horizon as a man accustomed to reading danger and shifting shadows. The morning sun climbed steadily, brightening the wet fields. Yet something felt wrong, too quiet, as if the world were holding its breath for the wrong reason. Jonas walked toward the fence they'd fixed, touching the fresh nails as though anchoring himself to the choice he already knew he'd made. He'd been drifting for years, a man searching for nothing in particular. But now trouble had found him, wrapped in the trembling handwriting of a widow who deserved better than dying alone in fear. A faint sound rode on the wind, distant horses, too many to be travelers. Jonas lifted his head sharply. The threat Edna feared wasn't far anymore. And whether he welcomed it or not, he was now standing on her side of the fence. Cole woke before sunrise, his body aching from another night spent half awake, listening for footsteps that never came. The cabin felt colder than usual, though the fire he'd tended still glowed in the stone hearth. Lila slept fitfully on the cot against the wall, one hand curled near her face as if she were afraid something might steal her breath while she dreamed. Cole watched her for a moment, not because he felt protective, but because he needed to understand her better. The tension in her brow hadn't eased in the days since he'd brought her to his ranch, and every small detail she revealed, every tremor in her voice, every hesitant question, told him she was still holding back more than she shared. He rose quietly and stepped outside. Frost coated the uneven boards of the porch, and the sky was a pale gradient of gray and rose. The valley stretched below, obscured by thin mist that clung to the earth like a veil. He breathed in the sharp air, hoping it might clear the unease tightening around his ribs. The isolation he'd once cherished now pressed against him with unwelcome weight. Something about having Lila here unsettled him in ways he hadn't anticipated. She disrupted routines he'd held for years, and he couldn't decide whether that bothered him or challenged him. When he returned inside, Lila was already up, her hair unbraided and loose around her shoulders. She looked smaller somehow, fragile but composed, as if she'd forced herself to rebuild whatever confidence had eroded overnight. Cole set a tin cup of warm water on the table. She thanked him softly but didn't drink immediately. Instead, she traced the rim with her fingertip, staring at it as though the cup might offer answers she hadn't found. "You slept?" Cole asked, pulling on his jacket. "Some," she murmured. "Enough, I think." He didn't push further. Pressing her never worked, she only shut down, withdrawing deeper into herself. Instead, he focused on what needed doing. The horses needed feeding, and the fence on the west side had started to sag. Lila watched him prepare his tools, her expression shifting like she wanted to speak but couldn't decide how much to reveal. Finally, she asked if she could help. He hesitated, weighing the risks of involving her in the work. She was capable. He'd seen her steady hands and the quiet determination she carried, but trust didn't come easily to him. Still, something about her tone convinced him. He handed her a pair of gloves. "Fine. But stay close," he said. "No wandering." Her nod was small but resolute. They walked toward the western fence line, the grass crunching under their steps. The land seemed endless in every direction, rolling in gentle swells toward distant ridges. Cole explained what needed fixing, expecting her to grow overwhelmed, yet she absorbed every detail with sharp attention. Working beside her felt strange, unfamiliar but not unwelcome. Every so often he caught her studying him, her eyes carrying questions she never voiced. After an hour, she paused and brushed her hair out of her face. "Cole," she said quietly, "I know you think I'm hiding things, and maybe I am. But I'm not trying to make trouble." He leaned against a fence post, waiting. "I didn't lie when I said my husband left me," she continued. "But I didn't tell you everything either. After he went missing, people in town started talking. They said I was to blame. They said I must have driven him to it. The sheriff didn't believe me, and his family made sure the rumors stuck. That's why I left." Cole studied her closely. There was truth in her voice, raw, painful truth, but also fear. Not fear of him, at least not in the same way as before. Fear of being dismissed again. Fear of being doubted. "You didn't kill him," Cole said, not as a question but a statement. She shook her head, her jaw tightening. "No. But people are easier to convince when they want someone to blame." He knew that better than she realized. People needed villains more than they needed facts. The sun inched higher, warming the frost until droplets clung to the fence rails. Lila returned to work, and Cole noticed a subtle shift in her movements. She wasn't trying to impress him or beg for favor. She simply wanted to contribute, maybe prove even to herself that she wasn't the helpless figure the town had painted her as. By midday, clouds thickened overhead, darkening the horizon. The storm was building. Cole urged Lila to head back, but she insisted on helping him finish the last section. The wind picked up, snapping her hair across her face, yet she kept working with stubborn determination. He couldn't decide whether her persistence impressed him or irritated him. She pushed herself harder than she needed to, as though trying to outrun something that followed her everywhere. When the first drops of rain started to fall, Cole grabbed her wrist. "Enough," he said firmly. "We're done for today." She stiffened at his touch, and he released her immediately. The look she gave him wasn't anger but a mixture of fear and reflexive defensiveness. It stung him more than it should have. He stepped back, nodding toward the cabin. They reached shelter just as the rain intensified into a hard, steady sheet. Inside, Lila sat near the fire, damp strands of hair clinging to her cheeks. Cole handed her a blanket, keeping his distance this time. She wrapped it around herself, pulling her knees up to her chest. "You think someone will come looking for you?" he asked, watching the flames dance. Her answer came after a long pause. "Yes. And if they find me here, they won't care about the truth." He flexed his hands, feeling frustration coil in his chest. Not at her, but at whoever had pushed her into this corner. Whoever had made her believe she had nowhere else to go. Lightning flashed outside, casting stark shadows across the cabin walls. Lila flinched, then steadied herself. Cole realized she wasn't afraid of the storm. She was afraid of what might follow it. He sat across from her, leaning forward. "If anyone comes," he said, "I'll handle it." She met his eyes for the first time in hours. Something in her expression softened. Not trust, not yet, but a fragile willingness to believe he meant what he said. The storm raged on, but inside the cabin, an uneasy but undeniable shift had taken root between them. Not peace, not safety, just the faintest suggestion of possibility. And that, for the moment, was enough to hold both of them in place. Dawn broke with a muted glow, filtering through the thinning rain clouds and settling over the valley in pale gold. Cole stepped out onto the porch, boots scraping the wood as he surveyed the fields. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered in the damp soil and the heavy scent of pine drifting on the breeze. He felt an unfamiliar heaviness in his chest, a blend of caution and resolve that had followed him through the restless hours of the night. Inside, Lila moved quietly, gathering the blanket, stoking the fire, trying to make herself smaller than she was. Cole knew she was waiting for him to decide something neither of them had dared to say aloud. He didn't return inside immediately. He needed a moment to understand the tightness forming in his thoughts. She had become part of this place faster than he'd expected, altering routines and tugging at instincts he'd kept buried for years. Protecting her felt natural, but it also carried risk. Whoever she feared, whoever had turned her into a convenient villain, might already be on her trail. Cole wasn't naive enough to ignore that danger, nor careless enough to pretend it wouldn't reach his land. When he finally re-entered the cabin, she stood by the table, holding the tin cup he'd given her the day before. Her expression was cautious, but she didn't look away when he approached. He noticed how exhaustion clung to her shoulders, how effort wove through the simplest breath she took. "We need to talk," Cole said, pulling out a chair. Her fingers tightened around the cup. "About them finding me. And about what you want if they do," he replied. She set the cup down, folding her hands. "I don't want to run anymore. I'm tired of acting like a criminal when I haven't done anything wrong. But I also know I can't face them alone. They don't want answers. They want someone to point at." Cole heard the bitterness in her voice, but beneath it, he sensed a deeper exhaustion, the kind that came from years of fighting battles no one else bothered to see. He leaned forward, forearms braced on the table. "You're not alone anymore," he said. "But I need you to be honest with me. Everything you've said so far, does it cover the whole truth?" She hesitated, as if weighing the cost of absolute transparency. Finally she answered, "Yes. I didn't hurt him. He left Cole. Walked out one night and never came back. The sheriff said he probably joined a crew heading west, but his family refused to believe that. They turned their grief into anger and I was the easiest target. I stayed as long as I could. Then the threat started. That's when I ran." Cole studied her closely. Her voice didn't tremble. Her gaze didn't shift. She wasn't crafting a narrative, she was surviving it. He gave a slow nod. "All right," he said. "Then we deal with whatever comes." She exhaled shakily, relief flickering across her features, but it didn't remove the shadows underneath. Cole could see how deeply her fear had rooted itself. and he knew fear often drew danger. By midday the sky had cleared enough for them to work outside. Lila insisted on helping again, though Cole kept her closer than before. She carried feed, repaired loose rails, and brushed the horses with careful hands. He watched her move about the ranch, noticing how naturally she adjusted to its rhythm. She didn't complain, didn't drag her feet, didn't hide behind excuses. There was grit inside her, misjudged, ignored, twisted by others, but unmistakable. Just as they finished repairing the last section of fence, Cole's horse lifted its head sharply, ears pointing toward the ridge. A thin trail of dust rose in the distance, drifting toward the valley like a signal. Cole's jaw tightened. "Riders," he said quietly. Lila froze. "How many?" "2," he answered. "Maybe 3. Not a full posse, but not travelers either." She stepped back, hands trembling despite her effort to steady them. Cole placed a hand on her shoulder, and this time she didn't flinch. Her eyes searched his, looking for something beyond reassurance. "What do we do?" she whispered. "We stay calm," he said. "You don't hide unless I tell you. Running makes you look guilty. Standing your ground shows you're done letting them decide the story." Her throat bobbed, but she nodded. The riders approached slowly, their silhouettes sharpening into recognizable shapes as they descended the ridge. At the front rode a man with a stiff posture and a coat that looked too fine for travel. Lila's breath hitched. "That's him," she murmured. "My husband's brother." Cole stepped in front of her, planting himself between her and the incoming men. He didn't reach for his weapon, not yet. But his stance made his intentions unmistakable. When the riders reached the fence line, the lead man pulled his horse to a halt. His gaze swept over Cole, dismissing him almost instantly, then fixed on Lila like she was a ledger he planned to settle. "You've caused enough trouble," the man said, voice dripping contempt. "You're coming back with us." "She's not going anywhere she doesn't choose," Cole answered, voice even but unyielding. The man blinked, incredulous. "This is family business." "No," Cole said, "this is intimidation disguised as duty." The man's lip curled. "You don't know what she's done." "I know you haven't proved a damn thing," Cole shot back. "And until you do, you have no authority here." A tense silence stretched between them. The horses snorted. Wind stirred the grass. Cole kept his stare locked with the man's, refusing to yield an inch. Finally, the man looked at Lila, his expression curdling with disdain. "You ruined my brother," he said. "Now you think you can hide behind some rancher like none of it matters?" Lila stepped forward before Cole could stop her. Her voice quivered at the edges, but her words held steady. "Your brother left because he wanted freedom from responsibilities he never accepted. You blamed me because it was easier than admitting he abandoned all of us. I won't be your scapegoat anymore." The man's jaw clenched. His companions shifted uncomfortably, clearly less certain than he was. Cole took a single step toward the fence. "You've said your piece. Now go." The man glared at him, then at Lila, but something in their combined resolve weakened his certainty. With a frustrated hiss, he jerked the reins and turned his horse sharply. The others followed, leaving the valley in a cloud of dust and resentment. Lila sagged as soon as they disappeared from view, her breath breaking in relief. Cole steadied her with a hand on her arm. "You handled yourself," he said. "Better than you think." She looked up at him, eyes glassy but determined. "I couldn't have done it alone." "You're not alone," he replied softly. They walked back to the cabin together. The storm had passed. The threat had receded. And for the first time since she'd arrived, the air around her felt lighter, as though she'd stepped out of a shadow she never expected to escape. That night, as the fire crackled and the valley settled into quiet, Lila sat beside Cole, no longer wary, no longer shrinking. She wasn't healed, not completely, but she was no longer running. Cole watched the flames dance and realized that something in him had shifted too. Protecting her wasn't duty. It wasn't obligation. It was choice, one he would make again without hesitation. The cabin felt different now, warmer in ways that had nothing to do with the fire. Outside, the wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of days untouched by fear. Lila leaned back, letting herself breathe fully for the first time in years, and Cole knew the story they'd started together didn't need further rescue or pursuit. It had already settled into something resolute, something earned. And for both of them, that was enough to claim as a beginning.